This is the Surface Pro 7, the newest product out of the Surface Pro line, and it packs quite a bit. It uses the 10th gen Intel CPU for its main computing power, comes in i3, i5, and i7 configurations, 8GB or 16GB of RAM, and you can have up to 1TB of SSD storage. The graphics also depend on which configuration you get, but I would definitely recommend getting at least the i5. You can choose two colors, platinum and matte black, and of course I got the matte black version because it's awesome, and I got some skins from Dbrand coming in the mail. So first impressions, this is my first Surface product, and overall I'm liking the experience so far. The Surface Pro comes with USB-C and a USB-A port, a headphone jack, and a microSD slot for expandable storage. And I kinda wish that the USB-A port was 3.0, but that's probably why there's the USB-C port instead. The metal chassis of the Surface Pro is actually really nice, and I especially like the edges. This is because it doesn't feel sharp at all like the iPad Pro, but the corners and sides are all kind of buffed out and sanded down so that whenever your hand or finger goes over it, it actually feels really smooth and really is well contoured. The built-in stand with the wide range of mobility is a great feature since you don't need an accessory to hold it up, and it gives you a lot more workspace freedom in terms of the angle of attack, which is something that really beats out the iPad Pro. You also have some tactile yet quiet buttons for the volume and power, which fit really nicely with the chassis without adding any bulk. And lastly, we have the front and rear cameras that have some nice specs to it, and they're nice to have, but probably 90% of the people who have the Surface aren't going to be using them. Moving to the display, it's a 3x2 display, and quite honestly, I'm not too upset by the thick bezels, but I do wish they would have put the Pro X's bezels onto this to make it look more premium and to give off the impression of a wider screen. This is supposed to compete with the iPad Pro, and the bezel size is just too much for borderline 2020, and it's probably the biggest criticism of all. This is the i7 configuration with 16GB of RAM and 256GB of storage, and the reason I got this Surface Pro is to replace my current laptop that I never use because it's 8+ years old and it just doesn't function as good as the current technology as it is, and I wanted something to digitalize my notes and write them free-handedly, as well as draw and sketch from time to time because I really like doing that. I'm also using this as an editing rig for when I'm on the go because I film in 4K 60fps, and when I'm not at home, I gotta have something to edit, so that's why I got the 16GB version of the Surface Pro 7, and I just overall needed something that could work well with the stylus, kinda like the iPad Pro, but since the iPad and iPad OS has really bad file management in general, that's why I went with the Surface Pro 7. As for battery life, I'm not too sure if it's because I don't use a laptop anymore and I don't remember how long a laptop is supposed to last, but I feel like this is really sad. The estimated battery hours on this is 10 hours, but I was getting around 6 or 7 hours on this while I was doing my initial testing of downloading my essential softwares like Photoshop and Premiere Pro and Office and all those things like that. And I was getting 6 to 7 hours of it, which is a little weird to me, and I feel like I'm not supposed to be charging it like every few hours. So I feel like battery life is definitely a weakness, especially comparing it to the Surface Pro 6, which had an estimated 13 hours of playback for optimal usage, but this one is 10, but honestly you get probably like 2 hours less than that. But I'm assuming most people who are going to be using this won't be away from a plug for 8 hours at a time, so it shouldn't be that big of a deal since most places do have a plug for you to charge. It's honestly kind of sad that when you buy the Surface Pro 7, it doesn't come with a type cover or a stylus and you have to buy it on your own, kind of like how EA is with their games and their DLCs. But when you do connect the Surface Pen to the Surface Pro, it works flawlessly when it comes to writing, drawing, and just even as a mouse in general. But you'll probably end up connecting a regular mouse to it because it's just a lot more efficient to use a regular mouse than using a stylus. So in terms of value, I think the Surface Pro really lacks in that category, considering that a lot of gaming laptops with 4K displays and dedicated graphics cards are cheaper than this, but I think the only reason why this one's so much more expensive is because of its portability as a 2-in-1, it's got semi-decent graphics, and you have the flexibility of taking on and off the keyboard, which is what those foldable 2-in-1s don't have, so you get a lot more flexibility, and you're definitely paying a premium for that flexibility, and whether it's worth it or not is up to you. I've got a full review coming up, and I've got a video of the experience of video editing on the Surface Pro 7 because like I said before, I got the 16GB version because I wanted to edit videos on it, and because I film in 4K 60fps and I edit in the same way, it's going to be good quality threshold to see how well it goes with Adobe Premiere, because that's the one I use to edit. So subscribe for that. Thanks for watching this initial impressions, and I will see you guys in the next video. Peace.